Five Nights at Freddy's takes inspiration from many different pieces of media, but most aren't nearly as on the nose as Frankenstein. To find the Frankenstein of Fnaf, look no further than the revived animatronic of Dreadbear. Most animatronics in the recent Fnaf games cannot match the mystique of Dreadbear. The overt connections to Frankenstein aren't merely surface level, and we're gonna discuss it all right now. Fredbear, The Crying Child, Fnaf 2, heck, even Midnight Motorist. It's all connected. Now, without further ado, my name is Minibite Games, and I'll be your guide through the fear-stricken halls of the Afton household. First, let's take a step back and look at the DLC that originally featured our Franken-Freddy subject, Curse of Dreadbear. The most popular lore attraction of this Halloween content expansion is, of course, the Vanny mask in the basement of the corn maze. With the inclusion of this ominous mask, Scott began the setup for the arrival of Vanny and the return of Glitchtrap in Security Breach. As a result, a lot of the immediate focus from theorists was directed towards this one Easter egg, and the rest of the DLC content fell by the wayside. Luckily, we've had many years now to comb through everything 1,000 times, and some very interesting discoveries have come to light. A very generic, yet useful observation about the animatronics present in the DLC is the strong focus on the nightmares. Now, that really shouldn't come as much of a surprise given the Halloween and spooky theming, but let's just keep that in mind for now. Looking at the minigame options available, there are a variety of level environments to choose from. Corn Maze and Foxy's Dark Ride appear to take place at a fall fest. The Danger Keep Out levels all take place at an even more rundown Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which may or may not have some interesting R&D connections. However, the two I want to focus on for today are the levels Hallway Crawl and Trick or Treat. Starting with the more simple environment, Hallway Crawl clearly takes place within the Fnaf 4 house. Outside of the presence of the nightmare animatronics, the minigame literally ends with the player walking into the bedroom, featured in every night of Fnaf 4. There is no doubt about it. This is the Afton household. Turning our attention to Trick or Treat, the environment we spawn in is a lot more interesting. In front of us is a door with a foxy knocker on the front, as well as 3 Fazbear masks on either side of us. Peering inside the windows, you can tell that this is a more antique-looking house that contains the withered animatronics. This is confirmed when scanning the surrounding environment, as the house is fairly substantial in size, and there are suspiciously 3 graves outside of the house. I wonder which group of 3 people all died and are connected to the Steel Wool games. Oh, look, it's the Murrays. They look happy. While I don't think Edwin is killed by M2 in Secret of the Mimic, it is very possible that Glitchtrap and/or Fazbear Entertainment believed him to be dead. To Afton's knowledge, Edwin should be long gone, and we're not sure what happened with M2, so both sides of Glitchtrap would be none the wiser to Edwin's survival at this point in the timeline. Whether he reappears at the Pizzaplex after its construction, or died between Secret of the Mimic and Help Wanted, the third grave appearance can totally make sense here. As for the other 2 Murrays, well, let's just say their bodies are safely buried. And if the Murrays are buried right outside of a mansion, I think we can make a pretty good guess on what house we're visiting this Halloween. That's right, this house is almost certainly the Murray house from Secret of the Mimic, that was later taken over by William Afton. Oh sure, he'll never touch the land until you're presumed dead, and no one's there to stop him. Heck, he barely made any changes to the wallpaper or David's room. Given the Murrays are already buried by the time of Trick or Treat, this would place our visit sometime after Afton took over the house, potentially around 1983. Now, I do think it's fair to point out that I don't think these minigames are very precise when it comes to the reality of the locations. However, combined with Hallway Crawl, the similar design aspects, and the specific graves outside, I feel that at the very least, we can connect this house to the Aftons and Murrays. And that leads me to the whole point of proving all this. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC is about the Aftons. Well, not entirely. Clearly, a lot of the DLC's runtime is put towards Glitchtrap hints and setups for future installments, as well as the main attraction of Vanny. However, I feel that a lot of the content in this DLC is meant to connect directly to the Afton family. For a start, Glitchtrap, someone who is obviously connected to Afton, returns for Curse of Dreadbear. On top of this, you can also trigger a set of car headlights to turn purple, which also ties back to Glitch Trap due to them both requiring the button on the side of the terminal to appear. The plush babies, characters with interesting ties to both the Mimic and Elizabeth, reappear for a new Fall Fest minigame. Even Michael is represented in the form of Grim Foxy, a literal fox on fire. And guess what character is heavily associated with Foxy in multiple pieces of media, and has been in a couple fires? That's right, Michael Afton. Nonetheless, the most important character that is represented in this DLC is the Crying Child, through the form of Dreadbear. When you think of the Crying Child, any number of things might come to mind. Perhaps his constant state of crying, or happiest day, or even the box. They're all good answers, sure, but there's another memorable part of his story. The final line uttered to him by someone else. I will put you back together. Why do I bring this up? Well, while Dreadbear is featured in a few different minigames, his breakout role comes from the well-named minigame Dreadbear. This minigame takes place at a location called Research and Development, and tasks the player with giving Dreadbear a brain. You know, now that I think about it, there's no reason that the Crying Child would have any sort of brain damage or issues. Nope, no reason at all. I mean, just think about the appearance and origin of Dreadbear, an animatronic very clearly based off of Frankenstein. The story of Frankenstein is a well-known one, where a man fascinated with alchemy named Victor Frankenstein creates new life through a humanoid creature made of a mixture of dead bodies and stolen items. Sound familiar to any characters from Fnaf? A man fascinated with alchemy and the idea of creating new life? That is a great description for William Afton, especially when considering his characterization in the fourth closet. And who exactly has a connection to the Fredbear plush and a bunker where he appears to be running experiments relating to the bite victim? Perhaps a certain purple guy? Afton clearly takes the role of the egotistical scientist Victor Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's monster is in some way related to the Crying Child. With that brief comparison to Frankenstein, I hope you can see why the bite victim is very evidently represented by Dreadbear, who was originally called Freddy. There is so much reanimation imagery with Dreadbear, it's not even a question personally. A major part of this DLC is following up on and clarifying that one line from all the way back in Fnaf 4. I will put you back together. However, if you consider the idea that Dreadbear represents the bite victim, then an interesting question arises. Was the bite victim brought back to life in the same way as Frankenstein? I hope that most of you can agree that at least in some way bite victim is brought back, likely through possession of an animatronic. After all, we got a whole game focusing on the bite victim's story leading up to his death and the bite of 83. Something has to happen to him post-death for most of this to matter. So, if the bite victim was brought back to life, what the heck happened to cause that? And how much can we learn from Frankenstein's story? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the source of all of this, Dreadbear. Analyzing the model of Dreadbear, it is clear that we haven't seen an animatronic like this anywhere before. Borrowing his hands from the five-fingered nightmare animatronics and seemingly wearing the feet of the toy animatronics, it's almost like Dreadbear is a mixture of parts. Before getting too deep into the design analysis, there is one character that needs to be brought up whenever you start comparing Dreadbear to other animatronics. One obvious connection that the DLC draws is that Dreadbear is a variant of Fredbear. While there was likely never a literal version of Dreadbear walking around, at least not in the 80s, Dreadbear clearly represents Fredbear in Curse of Dreadbear. For an initial simple connection, look no further than Dreadbear's name. It's quite literally only 2 letters away from Fredbear, likely made by combining Dread with Fredbear's name. We know from pre-release content of the DLC that Dreadbear's original name was going to be Frankenfreddy, which aligns much more with the references to Frankenstein. I don't see a good reason for Scott or Steel Wool to change Dreadbear's name away from the Frankenstein reference, unless it was in service to informing us about the animatronic. On top of this, with all the connections between Bite Victim and Dreadbear, it's not that big of a stretch at all to bridge them to Fredbear. The most important event in Bite Victim's life was the Big Bite, where Fredbear took a mini bite out of his brain. And when you have a whole minigame about giving Dreadbear a new brain, I'm not sure how much more on the nose all these connections could be. Now, with that out of the way, we can turn our attention back to the physical model of Dreadbear. To be honest, there's not a lot to glean by looking at the outer shell of our Frankenstein ripoff. Besides some stitching and his showman accessories, Dreadbear doesn't have a lot to share with us. Well, that is, until you peel back the layers and expose his very interesting endoskeleton. If you don't spend your time studying every different endoskeleton and springlock, this may seem like a fruitless effort. Sure, Dreadbear has an endoskeleton, but so does every animatronic ever. And you're definitely right, I thought the same thing. Until I considered what type of endoskeleton Dreadbear has. Look at the biceps and the forearms, covered in rings that surround a middle metal base. The lower chest, showcasing a pseudo ribcage made of straight rods extending from the main spine. Moving lower, the pelvis region is made of a single rectangular prism. The upper legs consist of a main cylinder with two smaller ones for shape, and the lower legs are once again split into those rings. All these small details consist of the majority of Dreadbear's endoskeleton. So, do any of the endoskeletons we know of in the series consist of these details? One look at the Endo 01 ruins any comparisons immediately. None of the details really match up, especially the ribcage, pelvis, and rings around Dreadbear's limbs. Another likely candidate that piqued my interest immediately was the Nightmare endoskeleton, introduced in Help Wanted. After all, Dreadbear's debut was in Curse of Dreadbear, which did focus on the nightmares. Once again, an immediate comparison kills any connection. The only attribute these two endos share is in the hands, but literally every other aspect is starkly different between them. That leaves us with very few options left. The Funtime endoskeleton isn't even slightly possible. I dare you to prove otherwise. The Glamrock Endo wasn't even introduced, nor likely created yet by the time of Curse of Dreadbear, and their designs don't even line up. And just like that, we are left with one last option. And let me tell you, when I realized the obvious design connections between this Endo and Dreadbear's, my mind was blown. Allow me to introduce Endo 02. Featured solely at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, Endo 02 is the upgraded version of Endo 01 used in at least the Withered animatronics and Mangle. Known for its unique head, bulkier shape, and ring limbs, this Endo honestly doesn't have a lot of lore to its name. Wait, Endo 02 has the same metal rings around its limbs. Endo 02's design lines up so perfectly with Dreadbear's endoskeleton, it's insane. The extended metal from the endospine that forms a ribcage, the puck's pelvis shape, all of the limbs, they're a direct match. Both endos even display similar bumps and grooves in multiple places. The only two Dreadbear parts that don't match the Endo 02 are the head and hands. As stated previously, the hands originate from the Nightmare animatronics, and the head of Dreadbear is just unique from every other animatronic. There is no doubt in me that Dreadbear uses a modified Endo 02. After I had this realization, an even more important question began to form in my brain. What does any of this mean? Why does it matter if Dreadbear uses an Endo 02 rather than an Endo 01 or a Glamrock Endo? Remember when I said that the Endo 02 is only featured in the Fnaf 2 location? We can connect the dots here to directly relate Dreadbear with Fnaf 2. Following this line of logic, Dreadbear should have something to say about specifically Fnaf 2 and its story. That thought may sound a little weird. After all, there isn't really anything outside of the endoskeleton to connect Curse of Dreadbear to Fnaf 2. Except, that isn't the whole story. You see, the Nightmares weren't the only group added to Help Wanted in Curse of Dreadbear. Instead, in a surprising turn of events, the Withered animatronics also made their debut in this Halloween expansion. They even get their own level inside the Afton house, in the form of Trick or Treat. Now, to be fair, part of the reason the Withered animatronics were added is likely due to their initial exclusion from the Fnaf 2 minigames in base Help Wanted. As a precursor and teaser for Curse of Dreadbear, Steel Wool added a 7th night to Fnaf 2, specifically to add the Withereds. Under this logic, it only makes sense for them to reuse the Withereds for the DLC as well. Regardless, there is still one specific detail in Curse of Dreadbear that the decision to include the wizards was not completely gameplay based. When first loading into the Halloween hub, instead of entering in front of the terminal, you find yourself in a different environment. A projector rolls, featuring the title of the DLC, while Dreadbear looms above you ominously. But this isn't what I'm interested in. In the middle of the forest with Dreadbear, you will find the withered animatronics. Once again, Dreadbear is tied to the withered animatronics, rather than going with the easy option of the nightmares. This detail, combined with Dreadbear's endo practically yelling the Endo 02 connections, confirms my suspicions. Dreadbear is related to Fnaf 2. But if Dreadbear is in fact connected to Fnaf 2, and Dreadbear is a version of Fredbear, then why is a Fredbear variant being connected to Fnaf 2? Are there any other indications that we should associate Fredbear with Fnaf 2? Yes. In my last theory video, which you should totally check out after this, I discussed the Fazburger. And more importantly for today, why the Fnaf 2 location was originally Fredbear's family diner. One of the biggest pieces of evidence for this theory comes from the very start of Fnaf 2. Hitting the New Game Plus button transitions the screen to a newspaper featuring the toy animatronics. Interestingly, the subheader for the article describes the Fnaf 2 location as a vintage pizzeria given new life. This narrows down which pizzeria of the Fnaf 2 location could have been, specifically between Fredbear's Family Diner or the 1983 Freddy's. To figure out which one makes more sense, we need to turn to our guide throughout the original games, the Phone Guy. On night 5, Ralph discusses the future of the location and mentions,
we're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that.
Now, why would they need to contact the owner of Fredbear's for issues at the Fnaf 2 location? In addition, Ralph's wording of the original restaurant owner could easily indicate that the owner of Fredbear's is the original owner of this restaurant. That would mean that before being reused for the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, this location was used as a Fredbear's Family Diner. Unfortunately, there is a valid way to explain this line away. It is very possible that Ralph was simply referring to the original restaurant location for Fazbear, aka the original Fredbear's. Although the relation to the location's current issues is more stretchy, that doesn't mean it can't work. Personally, I tend to lean towards the path of least resistance, connecting the dots to conclude that Fredbear's Family Diner from Fnaf 4 was reused for Fnaf 2. For one last piece of evidence, look no further than the breaker room map from Sister Location. While there are multiple implications from this one simple map, I want to draw your attention to the fact that Fredbear's Family Diner from Fnaf 4 is directly connected to the Sister Location bunker. This indicates that an elevator or path exists in Fredbear's that leads down to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. In almost all the games, we only see one way down, that being the elevator used by Michael located in the Afton house. I specify almost all the games because Help Wanted showed us a second entrance that leads directly down to the boiler room. Looking around the room we spawn in at, there isn't much in normal mode to analyze. However, once we flip the switch, the environment paints quite the picture. Directly in front of the player is Toy Bonnie's head, and to your left is Mangle's Endo 02 body. This is already a great indication that we're at the Fnaf 2 location, except for Fnaf 1 Foxy and Freddy's inclusion. The classic design shouldn't be at the Fnaf 2 location, so surely we just can't use this for lore. Except for the fact that the classic designs would be at the Fnaf 2 location, given retrofit theory, which states that the classics were retrofitted with Endo 02s to make the Wizards, and then brought back to classics for Fnaf 1, the classic animatronics would have been moved to the Fnaf 2 location. That would also explain the unfinished state of Foxy, Toy Bonnie, and Freddy. We are in an employee back room, where Fazbear is upgrading the location for Fnaf 2. The small references to Fnaf 4 in the room even make more sense with this time placement. If Fazbear is in the process of changing the location, the Fnaf 4 items represent the previous identity of said location, that being Fredbear's Family Diner. Both the purple phone and plush trap body also relate to the bite victim, which could be indicative of some importance or influence that the bite victim has at Fnaf 2. If Fredbear's has a location to the bunker, and so does the FNAF 2 location, then it makes sense for Fredbear's Family Diner to be the same place as the FNAF 2 restaurant. But who cares if the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza used to be Fredbear's? And wait, how does this all connect back to Dreadbear? Well, it's quite simple. The bite victim was reincarnated into the form of Golden Freddy at the FNAF 2 location. Let's break this down. At some point, the bite victim was brought back as a spirit. Besides being a very common occurrence among dead children in FNAF's story, the whole idea of Dreadbear is about reanimating the dead. Taking into account the last words uttered to bite victim, it only makes sense for the plan to come to fruition at some point. What about my claim regarding the Golden Freddy vessel for bite victim? Well, as stated previously, Dreadbear is a variant of Fredbear, the bite of 83 culprit. Whether or not Golden Freddy and Fredbear are supposed to literally be the same animatronic, or just different variants, or whatever, Golden Freddy's origins lie with Fredbear. It only makes sense for the Bite of 83 victim to be represented by the same animatronic that led to his death. If he's not solely possessing Golden Freddy, Bite Victim must have a special possession relationship with the vessel. This lines up with the week before, where Ralph hears two voices in his head from Golden Freddy. Interestingly, of the two spirits mentioned, there appears to be an angrier spirit and a calmer female voice. Noticeably, this includes no obvious candidate for the bite victim to fill, unless he's the angry spirit. And then there's the final and most questionable part of my claim. All of this happened at the FNAF 2 location. Returning to Dreadbear's Endo, I have no idea why Steel Wool would give Dreadbear an Endo 02 except to indicate the time period and location of his creation. Dreadbear, the reanimated bite victim in a new form, has the same base as the withered animatronics. So Golden Freddy at FNAF 2 it is. The idea that a spirit within Golden Freddy was recently activated before FNAF 2 is supported even by the phone calls. Ralph tells us on night 6 that
someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right.
We never see a Spring Bonnie animatronic at the FNAF 2 location. And while it could be in the safe room of the 1987 restaurant, it is a bit more of a stretch than the easier answer, Golden Freddy. Having a similar withered state to the withered animatronics, Golden Freddy could have been stored with the others in parts and service, simply off camera. This would mean they had a spare yellow suit in the back, unused. The Save Them minigame also shows Golden Freddy teleporting around the pizzeria, while Afton isn't even wearing the Spring Bonnie suit. While I can see the argument that it would make more sense for the animatronics to start acting differently if they saw their killer Spring Bonnie, I think a similar effect could also happen from the rebirth of the bite victim through Golden Freddy. But we're gonna have to visit Ultimate Custom Night. Ultimate Custom Night heavily implies that the vengeful spirit running this whole hellscape for Afton inhabits Golden Freddy. To be honest, any other interpretation of the ending cutscene for beating 4920 is definitely fighting a losing battle. Finding another spot for Golden Freddy in UCN's story is really difficult without using supplementary material. If he's not the vengeful spirit, why is Golden Freddy the only animatronic with a special death coin interaction? And why was Fredbear the final teaser for UCN? Therefore, for this video, I'll be assuming that someone in Golden Freddy is the vengeful spirit. In-game, the vengeful spirit seems to influence the other spirits into tormenting Afton. One of Withered Bonnie's voice lines illustrates this idea perfectly.
What is this new prison? Is it me trapped, or is it you? Perhaps it is us both.
Someone is in here unwillingly, separate from Afton, and likely is not the vengeful spirit. They're the one tormenting Afton after all. To me, this reveals that the vengeful spirit is strong enough to will other spirits into aggressive attack. In this case against Afton in UCN. Every animatronic doesn't have to be a separate victim of Afton, but Withered Bonnie is proof that at least one other person is trapped in here as well. Now, I'm not going to do a big section advocating for BV Vengeful Spirit. I know it's not super popular. However, this logic does work much better if Bite Victim is the instigator. Golden Freddy's secret form when he denies Afton's attempt to remove him from the game is literally Fredbear, an animatronic with no known connection to Cassidy, but a very clear one to Bite Victim. There's a good amount of evidence for Bite Victim Vengeful Spirit, and I'll have a video by Narrow Raven linked in the description on the subject. I highly recommend it. But for any time where Bite Victim Vengeful Spirit is assumed here, I will try to offer an alternative for Cassidy. Returning back to FNAF 2, all we know about what happened is that a spare yellow suit started moving around, and the animatronics began acting weird as a result. If Bite Victim was just reborn, and vengeful, it is very possible that he would lash out through appearing as the Golden Freddy hallucination and aggravating the other spirits, just like in UCN. Give gifts, give life even hints at Golden Freddy's potential aggression as a result of his rebirth. The puppet goes around to the 4 other spirits, giving gifts and masks. At the last minute, a 5th spirit appears, and immediately Golden Freddy jump scares the camera in place of the mask. The other minigames that feature jump scares could be explained away as the spirits lashing out after seeing their death play out once more. Either that, or all 3 animatronics jump scare at the very moment representing their possession, where the 5th spirit possesses Golden Freddy, the MCI possess the classics, and Charlie dies outside and is transferred to the puppet. In addition, Golden Freddy is just more aggressive in FNAF 2 in general. Besides UCN, this is the only game where Golden Freddy appears in the main roster of animatronics, and appears often in gameplay. To me, this indicates an increased level of aggression and presence at the FNAF 2 location. Under Cassidy Vengeful Spirit, rather than its aggression coming from initial shock at new possession, the origin would likely lie with Cassidy suddenly having a roommate in Golden Freddy, as well as seeing Afton at the location. The aggression resulting from Afton could also work for Bite Victim Vengeful Spirit, depending on what Afton did to Bite Victim after the big bite. It would also explain why a position just became available on night 5. Afton, posing as the day guard, quickly left for his safety after seeing the aggressiveness of the animatronics and Golden Freddy. And guess what story this lines up with perfectly? That's right, Frankenstein. In the Gothic story, once Victor reanimates Frankenstein's monster back to life, Victor flees out of fear, and only returns later to see that the monster is gone. Afton fled immediately after the success of his experiment, potentially due to safety reasons, and only returned later as the day card to search for Golden Freddy, and likely left again after seeing the increased aggression of the animatronics. However, there is one final piece of the puzzle that fully convinced me of this idea: FNAF 4. FNAF 4 and FNAF 2 are so closely tied to each other, it's honestly insane. We've already gone over how the diner and pizzeria are likely the same building, connecting both games in terms of location. Shifting focus to gameplay, both games have a Foxy variant appear in the player's front main view, who must be dealt with by lowering their aggression meter. While Golden Freddy can rarely appear on Night 2 of FNAF 2, both Golden Freddy and Nightmare Fredbear only become truly active and common on the 5th night of their respective games. Nightmare Fredbear and Golden Freddy often use their heads when trying to attack the player, rather than their whole body. As stated previously, Curse of Dreadbear chose to feature the Nightmare and Withered animatronics together in the same DLC. Nevertheless, the most important parallel between the 2 games is actually perfectly displayed by one iconic clip.
Was that the bite of 87?
The bites of 83 and 87 are well known both in and out of the FNAF community. FNAF 4 initially sparked much confusion about whether this game was showing us the bite of 87 mentioned in FNAF 1 or a new bite 4 years earlier. Now, we can safely say that this is the bite of 83, but the very intentional confusion fascinates me. Scott certainly knew what he was doing, just like how he knew he was making the bite victim cry constantly and imitate the puppet to mislead the audience. I am certain that the choice of the 2 bites wasn't on a whim, but instead to tell us who caused the bite of 87. While not directly, I think the mind behind the bite of 87 is the bite victim, controlling or influencing some other spirit, likely Withered Foxy. Once again, this would play into the idea of Bite Victim Vengeful Spirit and his initial aggression after gaining a vessel. It's a great narrative parallel to have the crying child be the victim of the bite of 83, only to repeat the same event on an adult 4 years later in 1987. However, I have yet to address one key part of the theory. Why would the bite victim possess Golden Freddy 4 whole years after the bite in 1987? That's a long time for the bite victim to just be doing nothing? Well, this all stems back to the sister location elevator in the Fnaf 2 location. From exploring the bunker as Michael and sister location, we know Afton had experiments relating to the bite victim's life, just like Didophobia, and likely fulfilled his wish of putting his son back together. After nothing but failures for 2 years, William commits the MCI, whether or not it's related to his goal of bringing the bite victim back. This causes Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to be shut down, and it is very possible that William saw signs of possession from the animatronics. This would lead directly into Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, expanding the experiments running in the basement. However, Afton has a new option available when Fazbear starts rebranding Fredbear's Family Diner into the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Finally putting his experiments to good use, Afton does something with the bite victim and the Golden Freddy Fredbear suit in R&D, aka Circus Babies, to allow bite victim to possess the vessel. Unfortunately for Afton, bite victim was vengeful for the bite, and whatever Afton did after his death, causing Afton to run off scared. This leaves Golden Freddy now active, and he lays low for the most part, until he spots Afton once again, this time as the day guard. This leads to the strange aggressive behavior of the animatronics, and the bite of 87. It's also very possible that the origin for Afton's idea to bring bite victim back was from the White Tiger, which we see in the basement during Secret of the Mimic. If the White Tiger was still around in the underground areas of the Murray Afton house, then Afton would have likely seen it at some point and realized what it stood for: life after death. There is one final small connection that I want to draw, that being Midnight Motorist. To lay the foundation, I believe we play as William Afton. The runaway is Michael Afton, and the footprints belong to Golden Freddy. If bite victim was activated around Fnaf 2, then he might have sought out Michael to get his own revenge from the bite. He lured Michael to the pizzeria and nearly killed him. It would explain why Michael would go to work at the Fnaf 2 location soon after, in further investigation regarding his brother, perhaps unaware about bite victim's vengeful nature. However, bite victim wouldn't truly get his revenge on Michael until later in the timeline with the Fnaf 4 night sections, which would make sense when you take into consideration Nightmare and Nightmare Fredbear's symbolism in that game. And, for the final time, this lines up extremely well with an important plot point from Frankenstein. After Frankenstein's monster is free in the world, he finds Victor's youngest brother, William, and kills him. While we know Michael doesn't die in Fnaf 2 or 4, both instances are a precursor to Ultimate Custom Night, Afton's Torment. Back to Frankenstein, this death is part of a rampage against Victor, which lines up suspiciously well with bite victim vengeful spirit. On top of this, Frankenstein's monster is unable to kill Victor himself before he dies to his own conditions, just like Henry's fire to send Afton to hell, robbing Golden Freddy of the chance to do it himself. However, he still got his revenge eventually. This is definitely very speculative, but it's not like we get much context in Midnight Motorist or Fnaf 2. Oh, and one last fun fact, Victor Frankenstein has a friend named Henry. So, as you can see, Dreadbear is a lot more complex and lore relevant than most people give him credit for. His importance doesn't stop at telling us that the bite victim was indeed brought back to life. No, Dreadbear answers all the questions about the bite victim's possession. And that's the theory. While I'd love to get into the complexities and specifics of bite victim vengeful spirit or White Tiger's relevance, I don't have the time. I'm too busy getting ready for the movie. If you're craving more content from the one and only mini-bite games, I have a major event coming up that you can all join. What is it? Oh, only an entire freaking marathon of all the games back to back, all streamed live right here on the channel. I've been doing practice streams throughout all of November every Saturday, and I will continue doing that until the big day. When is that big day? Well, while subject to change, for now, the big day is December 26th. So be sure to join in and have a good time before M2 zeroes on to your location. In other news, memberships are finally up on the channel, so if you guys have a little bit of money to spare and you want to help support this small channel, be sure to hit the join button and make a subscription. There are tons of small perks included as well. And with all that said, this is gonna be Mini Bike Games heading out. See you guys next time!